to free your captive Israel that mourns in lonely exile here until the Son of God appear.
Well, welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us today. And a special welcome to our friends in Union City as they're joining us via video today. Sure appreciate your encouragement. And boy, speaking of encouragement, on behalf of Pastor Lenora and myself, just a huge thank you to all of you for encouraging us and supporting us on the celebration of our ordination. It was an incredible day, and I know a lot went into it. And so for those of you who had anything to do with it, from greeting and ushering to preparing food to our worship team, our tech teams, just across the board, everyone, we are so appreciative, and it was such an incredible time. Very special thank you to Pastor Brian and to his assistant Kathy as well for everything that they did in organizing and making that possible. So thank you. Today, we are celebrating the second week of Advent. Advent means the arrival of a notable person, thing, or event. Now, in the Christian church, Advent is the anticipation of the celebration of the arrival of Jesus. That culmination, of course, is called Christmas Day. The 4 weeks of Advent remind us that Jesus not only brought us love, hope, peace, and joy, but he is all of those things. He embodies those elements. Last week, we celebrated love, and we lit that first candle of the Advent wreath. This week, we're celebrating the hope that Jesus brought to this world. Do you ever wish you could escape life, escape responsibilities, work, school, the snow, right? How about a troubled relationship or bad news? Sometimes we face things in life that we would like to move away from, and we don't. There are also moments when we need to move to a place in life that will protect us from the harm of others, or even from ourselves. Well, today we're going to talk about how we can escape to God's best for us and how there is hope in that. And with that, we begin a 3-week series called Christmas According to Matthew. And here is what will be quite unique about these next 3 weeks. If you think back to the November series titled The 3 Images of Salvation, you'll remember that Pastor Brian shared a unique view of salvation through an Old Testament perspective of the Exodus, exile, and priestly sacrifice. Well, each week of this Christmas series, we will make a connection to that series. And we'll do that by using a passage of Scripture from the Christmas story according to Matthew to the previously defined and discussed subjects of the Exodus, exile, and sacrifice. Pastor Brian taught us that the Old Testament sets the table for the New Testament. That which was concealed in the Old Testament is revealed in the New. Certain elements of the Christmas story in the Gospel of Matthew are a perfect example of this. Matthew sets the table for us with his Gospel. It is in his Gospel that the Old Testament references are used to reveal a clear connection between things that were happening and being said then to what was taking place through the Gospel story, and specifically the Christmas story. Matthew and Luke are the only 2 Gospels that tell the Christmas story, and Matthew is the only one who makes reference to the Old Testament events. He does this because he is writing for a Jewish audience, an audience that is steeped in Old Testament knowledge and tradition. Matthew's aim is to reveal to them how the events of the Old Testament, which they are familiar with, provide evidence of Jesus being the Messiah and Savior, whom the world, and specifically the Jews, have been waiting for. In other words, Matthew successfully demonstrates how Jesus fulfilled the prophecies within the Jewish scriptures. And he does this by inserting these references and literary images within the story that he tells about the birth and early years of Jesus. This creates a clear connection between Matthew and his audience and his desire for them to see Jesus as their Messiah. The first connection we will talk about of Matthew's gospel with the Old Testament comes in the form of an escape. The Exodus was a mass escape from the Pharaoh. The Israelites were children of God first and foremost. They belonged to God, not to Pharaoh. God appeared to Moses in the burning bush and instructed him to lead them out of their oppression and slavery. Remember also that God spared and preserved Moses years earlier. It's recorded in non-biblical texts that Pharaoh had received word in a dream about the birth of the deliverer of Israel. This could be why Pharaoh ordered the slaughter of all young male children. Well, Moses' father also had a dream. In it, he was shown that it would be his son, Moses, who would deliver Israel. And so Moses' father rescued him from the massacre. Another escape. When Moses grew up, he did become that person who would lead the Israelites out of Egypt and slavery. And that move, that great escape, was called the Exodus. When you hear our story from Matthew today, hopefully you'll be able to see the strong parallel between the two stories and between Moses and Jesus. Now, before we hear that story, let's listen to what Pastor Brian said about the Exodus in last month's series. He's talking about how it relates to salvation, a word synonymous with freedom.
The story of the Exodus teaches us that God saves us from narratives, systems, and stories about ourselves which simply are not true. Like the Israelites in slavery in Egypt, we repeatedly tell ourselves or are led to believe things about ourselves that simply are not true or right. The Israelites believed, because it was all they had ever been told or experienced, that their destiny, their future, their hope was in the hands of a system called the Egyptian Empire and a person called the Pharaoh. It was not. The Israelites' destiny, future, and hope was in the hands of God. The proof of this? The 10 plagues, the miraculous escape from Egypt, the parting of the Red Sea. The Israelites were not first slaves. They were first the children of God. The narrative they had been told and taught was false. It was wrong. God saved them from that narrative. And He's doing the same with us.
Well, with that in mind, let's read this portion of the Christmas story from Matthew's Gospel. To set this up, it's believed that Jesus is about 2 years old. Herod is king at this time, and Herod has learned of the birth of Jesus. He becomes frightened. Herod has used the title King of the Jews for himself for over 30 years. And when he learns that the Jewish Messiah has been born and was being called King of the Jews as well, Herod fears that Jesus would challenge his authority and take his throne. And so he sets out to destroy Jesus. Imagine being afraid of a little baby, so much so that you would want to get rid of all the little babies so that your throne would be safe. But that's what happened. And Herod asks the wise men who are on their way to visit Jesus to come back and tell him where Jesus is once they find him. Well, as we know, the wise men visit Jesus and are warned not to return to Herod. And that is where we pick up our story. This is from Matthew chapter 2, verses 13 through 18. When they had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. "Get up," he said, "take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him." So he got up, took the child and his mother during the night, and left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. And so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I called my son." When Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. Then what was said through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. "A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more." This entire passage is a merging of significant moments in the Old Testament with more current happenings as told by Matthew. Here are some key crossovers. The warnings in the dreams, many dreams from the father of Moses to the father of Jesus. The exodus of the Israelites to the exodus of Jesus. The bridging of Scripture from Hosea. "Out of Egypt I called my son," which we'll talk about later. The Jeremiah passage of Rachel weeping. The grief of the Bethlehem mothers and their losses compared to the deep sorrow of Rachel in the Old Testament. All of this is meant to strike a chord with any member of Matthew's Jewish audience who has carried pain and passion throughout their lives that is connected to any of these events. Matthew is stating these factual happenings that so clearly parallel Moses and Jesus so that they will see Jesus as a deliverer and not simply as a historical figure. One of the most notable lines in that passage is this: "Get up, take the child and his mother, and escape to Egypt." This is an exodus, an escape. Escape can take on various meanings. It could be breaking free from confinement or control. That is certainly true in the case of the Israelites getting free from Pharaoh. Escape can also be an act of successfully avoiding something dangerous. What Joseph did for Jesus and Mary by taking them to Egypt is certainly an example of this. Well, in both of these instances, the exodus of the Israelites from Pharaoh and the exodus of Jesus' family from Herod involve an overarching supernatural direction and protection from God. Dreams were used, angels were used, communicated warnings and plans to both the father of Moses and the father of Jesus. And then when Moses was ready to be used by God, a burning bush and a series of plagues and events all became instrumental in leading him and giving him strength and leverage. You may not have ever encountered a burning bush in your life, but haven't you had moments where you have stopped and said out loud, "Whoa, that was a God moment"? Twice in this past week, I've heard from people who were in serious accidents that totaled their cars. In both cases, everyone walked away without a scratch. And in both cases, at least two of the drivers recognized it was God who protected them. It was God who was present. When we stop and we look and listen for God's presence, He is there. We can find Him. And in those moments, we will often see God and hear from Him in whatever way he speaks to us as individuals. And his presence in certain moments of our lives can and should give us hope for the future. We're reminded throughout life and circumstances in life that with God, there is no coincidence or haphazardness. Rather, the plans he has are embedded with hope. Joseph heard from God in a series of dreams whenever God needed him to be moved, guided, and protected from danger. After moving his family to Egypt, Matthew tells us this. After Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who were trying to take the child's life are dead." So he got up, took the child and his mother, and went to the land of Israel. Again, a dream prompts a move, and they leave Egypt. This is an instrumental exodus that helps to fulfill prophecy and connect the Old and the New Testament. Here's how. In Matthew 2:15 it says, "Out of Egypt I called my son." That passage is taken directly from the Old Testament book of Hosea. It is referring to the Israelites finding their freedom from Pharaoh by leaving Egypt and going toward the promised land, a land of milk and honey, a land of hope. And in Matthew, this passage is used to link Jesus to the Old Testament. It is Jesus who would now be my son, called out of Egypt. The family fled to Egypt and then left Egypt, and they land in Nazareth. Jesus is directly connected to the Israelites. My son, the Israelites, my son, Jesus. Matthew is communicating that just as God preserved the people of Israel by using Moses to lead them to freedom, Jesus would be the new Moses. He would be preserved. He would lead all people out of slavery of their sin to the freedom of their salvation. In both cases of the exodus of the Israelites and the exodus of Jesus, it would not be the rulers of the earth that would prevail. It would be God and his supernatural plan, because God is a God of completion. Think about this. Do you think God would bring Mary and Joseph all that way just to have them be destroyed by some king who is afraid of being usurped? And the same with the Israelites and their escape. The two are linked by one great commonality: God's plan and purpose. And with that comes hope. The hope they had was not that they were what they were moving away from, rather what they were experiencing along the way and moving toward as God was going before them and leading them. Like the words of Psalm 46 say, God is our refuge and our strength, a very present help in times of trouble. God was, God is, and God will be supreme and in control. Think about this. In the next chapter of Matthew, chapter 3, Jesus gets baptized, and a voice from heaven declares, "This is my Son, in whom I am well pleased." God had a future planned for Jesus. God had plans for Moses. God had plans for the Israelites. God has plans for you. What has God started in your life that you are doubting its future? What do you need hope for today? What is something that you need maybe to begin to move away from? An exodus. And what is God calling you toward? You're probably not being pursued by a king who wants to destroy you. But what do you need freedom from? What do you need to escape from? Is it some kind of a system, a sin, a harmful habit, a fear, or a series of fears that will not leave you alone. Maybe it is a person or a less than ideal relationship in your life. When we move away from one thing and we put God in the equation, He will always provide a hope and a future. Christmas is a season to remind us of the hope that we have in what God has done in the past and is doing in the present, and that it is good. Today's story should solidify for us that we serve a God who is alive and well and wants to lead us to better places in life. Just as God prompted Moses and Joseph, He's able to prompt you. Jesus said, "Follow me. I am the way, I am the truth, and the life." If you're wandering today and looking for a place to go, why not move toward Jesus? He will provide direction, clarity, and purpose for your life. Here are some ways this week that we all can begin to move a little closer to Jesus. The commonality in these Exodus stories is that they started with a vision. God communicated. He will speak to all of us in different ways, but we need to be ready to listen. Through prayer, reading the Bible, good counseling, a trusted friend, finding yourself at worship, joining a small group. You get the point. I'm impressed that in our stories today, the people whom God directed were willing to listen for His voice and then receive it. Why not this week begin to talk with God a bit more and simply ask, "Where would you have me go?" And then listen, wait, and watch. An exodus also always involves a move. Maybe your life is stuck, stagnant. Maybe you have not pursued much of anything lately and you're feeling unmotivated, maybe even depressed. Why not make a move in a new direction? Start small. You don't need to move to Africa. Set an attainable goal and then begin to move toward it. Once you attain the first goal, set a second. Maybe it is saying, I'm going to move from this habit and routine in my life to something different, something better. I am going to make an exodus. I have lived in this place in my life for so many years, and it is not good for me. And usually the best first step is to communicate with God. Again, asking God, where would you have me go? What would you have me do? Finally, an exodus affirms God's presence. Allow this Christmas season to remind you of God's presence. God is always present, even when you don't realize it. In both of these escape stories, God's fingerprints are all over the place. You know, you and I are no different than the people in these stories. God is present and will speak to us. We just need to listen. I appreciate these lyrics from an old Phil Keaggy song where he says this, "Who said there's no God to be found? You're misled. He is all around." One of the things I like a whole lot about Christmas is this. There are reminders everywhere that we are celebrating Jesus. And even those who do not know who Jesus is, they're celebrating Him. Think about it. People decorate their houses and stick trees in their living rooms because of Jesus. People give gifts to each other just like Jesus was given to us as a gift, and they may not even realize why. Secular radio stations play Christmas music 24/7 for weeks. Many of these songs are celebrating Jesus. Barb and I were at the mall the other day, and playing through their sound system were some great Christmas songs. Many of them were singing about Jesus, and everyone in that mall could hear them. Any other time of the year, I don't hear Jesus at the mall, but I do at Christmas. Listen, God will make His presence known to us whether we know him or not. He will show up at the most surprising times and in the most surprising places. And sometimes he is calling us to escape, to have an exodus, and to move closer to him. Let us celebrate the hope that Jesus gives us this Christmas as he invites us to move closer to him.